My name is Savannah Mitchell. I'm 32, and I thought I knew my family until I discovered my brother had been plotting to steal my inheritance for over a year. What started as a simple wedding venue favor turned into the most devastating betrayal of my life when Derek showed up with a moving truck, claiming my grandmother's Victorian mansion was legally his. The family I'd trusted with everything had been conspiring against me behind closed doors, and the wedding was just their elaborate cover story. But they underestimated one thing. I had been recording everything, and my lawyer was already 3 steps ahead of their scheme. That devastating moment didn't just shatter my trust in family loyalty, it exposed a web of lies that would ultimately destroy our entire family dynamic forever. Hey everyone, before we dive into this absolutely wild family revenge story, I'm dying to know, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments, and if you're ready for a story that'll have you questioning everything you thought you knew about family loyalty, smash that like button and hit subscribe because this tale of betrayal and sweet justice is about to blow your mind. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this unfolds. Growing up, Derek and I were inseparable. As the older sibling by 4 years, I'd always been his protector, his biggest supporter, and honestly, his biggest enabler. When our grandmother Rose passed away 3 years ago, she left her stunning 1,890 seconds Victorian mansion to me in her will. The house sat on 5 pristine acres in Charleston's historic district, complete with wraparound porches, original hardwood floors, and gardens that belonged in Southern Living magazine. Derek had always been jealous of Grandma Rose's favoritism toward me. She'd raised us after our parents died in a car accident when I was 15 and he was 11. Rose saw something special in my love for history and architecture, often saying I was the only one who truly appreciated the family legacy. She'd walk me through every room telling stories about each antique, each piece of crown molding, each hand-painted ceiling medallion. When Derek announced his engagement to Madison 6 months ago, I was genuinely thrilled for him. Madison seemed sweet enough, though I noticed she had expensive tastes and a habit of making pointed comments about old money and generational wealth. Still, love is love, and I wanted my brother to be happy. The conversation that changed everything happened on a rainy Tuesday evening in March. Derek called me, his voice unusually strained, explaining that Madison's dream wedding venue had double-booked them just 2 months before their June ceremony. The deposit was non-refundable, the guest list was already sent, and they were absolutely devastated. "Savannah, I know this is huge to ask," he said, his voice breaking with what I thought was genuine emotion. "But would you consider letting us use Grandma's house for the wedding?" Madison fell in love with it the moment she saw it, and honestly, it would mean everything to us. We can't afford another venue on such short notice. My heart melted. This was family. This was what Grandma Rose would have wanted. Her home filled with love and celebration. I said yes immediately, even offering to help with decorations and catering logistics. Derek's relief was palpable, and Madison actually cried with gratitude when he told her. Over the next 2 months, I threw myself into wedding planning with enthusiasm I didn't know I possessed. I hired florists, coordinated with caterers, arranged for additional parking in the neighboring field, and even had the house's vintage chandeliers professionally cleaned. Madison had specific visions involving fairy lights throughout the oak trees, a dance floor on the back lawn, and ceremony seating that showcased the house's stunning facade. What I didn't realize was that every vendor meeting, every walkthrough, every planning session was being carefully orchestrated. Madison would arrive early to each appointment, speaking privately with vendors about future events, and asking detailed questions about the property's layout, security systems, and access points. She'd linger after meetings, taking photos and measurements while I was distracted with other details. Derek's behavior should have raised red flags, but I was too caught up in wedding excitement to notice. He'd ask strange questions about my security system, about whether I'd updated my will recently, about my work travel schedule. When I mentioned potentially taking a vacation after the wedding stress, he seemed almost too encouraging immediately, suggesting specific dates and destinations. The week before the wedding, Madison insisted on having the rehearsal dinner at the house as well, claiming the local restaurant had also had a scheduling conflict. Again, I agreed, wanting everything to be perfect for them. That rehearsal dinner was when I first noticed the extended family members I didn't recognize, people Derek claimed were Madison's distant relatives, who'd driven in from out of state. These mysterious relatives spent an unusual amount of time exploring the house, commenting on the antiques, asking pointed questions about property values and inheritance laws. One elderly man, who Derek introduced as Madison's great-uncle Henry, spent 20 minutes examining my grandmother's original land deed, which hung framed in the study. "Beautiful property," he'd said, his eyes calculating. "Must be worth quite a fortune these days. Properties like this, with this much history, they're irreplaceable." Makes you wonder about proper ownership documentation, doesn't it? At the time, I thought he was just making conversation. Now I realize he was conducting reconnaissance. The wedding day itself was absolute perfection. The weather cooperated, the vendors executed flawlessly, and the house looked like something from a fairy tale. Madison was a stunning bride. Derek couldn't stop smiling, and over 200 guests celebrated on the grounds that had been in our family for generations. I spent the entire day playing hostess, ensuring every detail was perfect, never noticing how many of those wedding guests weren't actually celebrating, but rather conducting what I now know was a comprehensive property assessment. The morning after the wedding, I woke up exhausted but happy, ready to begin the massive cleanup process. The caterers had already removed most of their equipment, but chairs, tables, and decorations were scattered across the property. I'd planned to spend the day slowly restoring my grandmother's house to its original state, perhaps reminiscing about the beautiful ceremony while I worked. That's when I noticed things were wrong. Small things at first. The antique brass candlesticks from the mantelpiece were missing. The vintage crystal vase that usually sat on the piano had vanished. I initially assumed items had been moved during the party preparations and would turn up as I cleaned, but as the day progressed, the missing pieces multiplied. My grandmother's sterling silver picture frames had disappeared from the study. The hand-painted china plates she'd displayed in the dining room hutch were gone. Even the antique door knocker had been removed from the front entrance. These weren't items that would be accidentally misplaced during party cleanup. They were being systematically stolen. When I called Derek to ask if he'd noticed anyone taking things during the reception, his response was oddly dismissive. "Oh, you know how these things go," he said, his voice strangely casual. "People probably just moved stuff around while dancing. I'm sure everything will turn up. Madison and I are actually heading out for our honeymoon today, so we can't really help look right now." Something in his tone made my stomach clench, but I pushed the feeling aside. This was my brother. He'd just gotten married. Of course he was distracted. Over the next 3 days, I discovered more missing items. Expensive things. Antique things. Things that had been specifically mentioned in my grandmother's detailed inventory of family heirlooms. The missing pieces weren't random party casualties. They represented a calculated selection of the most valuable and historically significant items in the house. I filed a police report, but without evidence of forced entry or clear suspects, there wasn't much they could do. The officers suggested the thieves had likely been party guests who'd used the celebration as cover for their crimes. They recommended I review any security footage and consider who had access to the house during the event. That's when I realized I'd never actually seen any security footage from the wedding day. When I checked my surveillance system, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. The cameras had been systematically disabled the morning of the wedding. Not broken or obviously tampered with, but professionally deactivated, using the master control panel that only someone with intimate knowledge of my security system could access. Only 3 people knew the location and access code for that panel: myself, Derek, and Madison, who I'd foolishly given the information to for emergency purposes during wedding planning. The pieces started falling into place with terrifying clarity. Derek's strange questions about my security system. Madison's excessive interest in the house's layout and valuable items. Those mysterious wedding guests who'd spent more time cataloging my possessions than celebrating the marriage. But the real revelation came when I decided to review my grandmother's will and property documents, just to ensure I had everything properly documented for the insurance claims. That's when I found the envelope, hidden behind my grandmother's original land deed in the study. The same document that mysterious Uncle Henry had examined so carefully was a sealed envelope with my name written in Rose's familiar handwriting. Inside was a letter dated just 3 months before her death, along with a separate sealed packet labeled, "In case of family betrayal." Rose's letter revealed she'd been aware of Derek's resentment about the inheritance. She'd overheard him making bitter comments about the house going to me instead of being split equally. More disturbing, she'd caught him researching property law and inheritance challenges online during one of his visits. "My dear Savannah," the letter read, "I pray you never have to read this, but if you do, it means Derek has proven me right to be concerned. I've taken certain precautions to protect what's rightfully yours. In the sealed packet, you'll find copies of recorded conversations and documentation that may become necessary. Trust your instincts and remember that blood doesn't always guarantee loyalty." With trembling hands, I opened the sealed packet. Inside were USB drives labeled with dates, professional photographs of Derek and Madison meeting with people I didn't recognize, and what appeared to be legal documents I couldn't immediately understand. When I plugged in the first USB drive, I heard my grandmother's voice recording a conversation she'd secretly captured during Derek's last visit before her death. In it, Derek was clearly discussing plans to challenge the will, claiming, "I'd manipulated Rose into changing her inheritance decisions. The house should be split between us," Derek's voice said clearly through my speakers. "She's not even married, she doesn't have kids. What does she need with all that space and money? Madison and I could actually use it to build a real family legacy." But the most chilling recording was Madison's voice, apparently unaware she was being recorded discussing their long-term strategy with someone over the phone. "Once we get married there, we'll have established residency and emotional connection to the property," Madison's voice explained, with calculating coldness. "Derek's been documenting how Savannah neglects the maintenance and historical preservation. We've got photos of every valuable item, appraisals and witnesses who'll testify that she's not properly caring for the family heritage. The wedding is just phase 1. 3 days after discovering my grandmother's devastating recordings, I was sitting in my kitchen reviewing legal documents when I heard the rumble of a large truck coming up my driveway. Looking out the window, I saw a massive moving truck followed by Derek's pickup truck and Madison's SUV. My heart started racing as I watched my brother and his new wife climb out of their vehicles, followed by 2 uniformed movers and what appeared to be an official-looking man in a business suit carrying a briefcase. Derek walked up to my front door with an expression I'd never seen before. Cold, calculated, and completely devoid of the brotherly affection I'd known my entire life. When I opened the door, he didn't even greet me. "Savannah, we need to talk," he said, pushing past me into the house. "There's been a significant development regarding Grandma Rose's will and this property." Madison followed behind him, no longer the grateful bride from just days before. She was scanning the rooms with the focused intensity of someone conducting an inventory, her eyes cataloging every piece of furniture, every antique, every family heirloom. The man in the business suit introduced himself as Harold Pemberton, claiming to be an estate attorney who'd been retained by the family to resolve what he called irregularities in Rose Mitchell's final will and testament. "Miss Mitchell," Pemberton said, opening his briefcase with theatrical precision, "I'm afraid there are serious questions about the validity of the will that granted you sole ownership of this property. New evidence has come to light, suggesting undue influence and potential elder abuse in the months before your grandmother's death." My mouth went dry as he pulled out official-looking documents, spreading them across my grandmother's antique dining table like he was conducting a hostile business takeover. "These documents show a pattern of manipulation," Derek said, his voice now carrying an authority I'd never heard before. You isolated Grandma Rose from the rest of the family, controlled her medications, and pressured her into changing the will when she was mentally compromised. Madison nodded sympathetically, though her eyes remained calculating. We know this is difficult to hear, Savannah, but Derek has been gathering evidence for months. The recordings he made during his visits clearly show Rose was confused about family relationships and property ownership. I stared at them in shock, realizing they'd turned my grandmother's own protective recordings into weapons against me. They were claiming I'd been the manipulative one, using Derek's documented concerns as evidence of my alleged abuse. The court has granted a temporary restraining order requiring you to vacate the premises immediately. Pemberton continued, sliding official papers across the table. All personal property and family heirlooms must remain on site pending the investigation. You're allowed to take only personal clothing and essential items. Derek's expression softened slightly, but it felt performed rather than genuine. Look, sis, this doesn't have to be ugly. We're family. Madison and I are prepared to let you stay in the guest cottage while this gets sorted out, but the main house needs to be secured for the legal proceedings. That's when I realized the full scope of their plan. They weren't just stealing my inheritance, they were systematically dismantling my entire life, while positioning themselves as the reasonable parties trying to help their disturbed sister. But they had made one critical mistake. They assumed I'd be as unprepared as I'd been naive. That's interesting, I said, keeping my voice remarkably steady considering my heart was pounding like a war drum. Because I have some documents of my own that might complicate your timeline. I walked to my grandmother's antique secretary desk and pulled out a thick manila folder I'd prepared after discovering Rose's hidden recordings. Derek's confidence wavered slightly as I spread my own papers across the table. These are certified copies of recorded conversations between Derek and Madison discussing their plan to steal this property, I announced, watching their faces drain of color, along with photographic evidence of them systematically removing family heirlooms during the wedding reception. Madison's composure cracked first. That's impossible. We never, you never. What, Madison? I interrupted, pulling out printed screenshots from my security system. Never planned to disable my cameras. Never had your relatives conduct property appraisals during the wedding. Never discussed establishing residency claims through the marriage ceremony. Derek lunged forward, trying to grab the property documents, but I'd already stepped back toward the kitchen where my own attorney was waiting. Derek Madison, Mr. Pemberton, I said with satisfaction. I couldn't hide. I'd like you to meet Catherine Rodriguez, my estate attorney, who's been reviewing your fraudulent documents for the past hour. Catherine emerged from the kitchen, her expression professionally stern but with a slight smile that suggested she was enjoying this moment as much as I was. Mr. Pemberton, she addressed the fake attorney directly, I've taken the liberty of contacting the State Bar Association and there's no record of your license to practice law in South Carolina. In fact, Harold Pemberton died in 1987, which makes your impersonation of him particularly problematic from a legal standpoint. The man's face went ashen as Catherine continued. The restraining order you've presented is fraudulent, printed on letterhead stolen from the county courthouse. We have security footage of Madison printing these documents at a local copy shop yesterday afternoon. Derek's false confidence completely evaporated. Savannah, you don't understand. This house should be ours. Grandma Rose always said, family property should stay in the family. You're absolutely right, I replied, savoring every word. Family property should stay in the family. Which is why it's staying with me, the person Grandma Rose actually chose to inherit it. The person she trusted enough to leave recorded evidence protecting her decision. Catherine stepped forward with her own briefcase. Mr. and Mrs. Fletcher, you're being served with restraining orders, preventing you from entering this property or contacting Miss Mitchell except through legal counsel. You're also being charged with attempted fraud, theft of family heirlooms, and conspiracy to commit property theft. As if on cue, two police officers appeared at my front door. I'd called them before Derek's arrival based on Catherine's advice after reviewing all of my grandmother's evidence. The moving truck, Derek's elaborate legal theater, Madison's calculating confidence. It all crumbled in less than 20 minutes. But the real justice was just beginning. As Derek and Madison were led away in handcuffs, their fake attorney, Harold Pemberton, frantically trying to distance himself from the fraud charges, I finally had a moment to process the full scope of their betrayal. But Catherine Rodriguez wasn't finished. She'd been investigating this case since I'd first contacted her with my grandmother's evidence, and what she'd discovered went far beyond a simple inheritance grab. Savannah Catherine said, settling into my grandmother's favorite armchair with a thick legal folder, "This conspiracy goes back almost 2 years. Your brother and Madison have been planning this since before they were even engaged." She opened the folder to reveal a timeline that made my stomach turn. Phone records showed Madison had been in contact with Derek 6 months before he'd even introduced her to the family. Their entire relationship had been orchestrated around gaining access to my inheritance. Madison's real name is Madison Whitmore, Catherine explained. She's been involved in 3 similar schemes across the Southeast, targeting individuals with valuable inherited properties. She finds unmarried men with family wealth, seduces them into marriage, then manipulates inheritance disputes. The depth of their deception was staggering. Madison had researched our family extensively before ever meeting Derek, learning about our parents' deaths, our grandmother's role in raising us, and, most importantly, the specific terms of Rose's will. She'd even visited Charleston multiple times before their first date, photographing the house and researching comparable property values. Derek wasn't just her victim, Catherine continued. Phone records and financial documents show he was a willing participant from the beginning. They opened joint bank accounts months before their engagement with Derek, transferring money to pay for Madison's inheritance research and legal consultation fees. The wedding itself had been a sophisticated criminal operation. Those mysterious relatives weren't Madison's family at all. They were professional thieves and con artists who specialized in high-end property crimes. The missing antiques and family heirlooms hadn't been randomly stolen during the reception. They'd been specifically targeted based on a detailed inventory Madison had compiled during her wedding planning visits. "We've recovered most of the stolen items," Catherine said, pulling out photographs. They were being held in a storage facility rented under Madison's real name. The plan was to sell them privately after establishing legal claim to the property. But the most chilling discovery was Derek's detailed documentation of my daily routines, work schedule, and personal relationships. He'd been secretly photographing my mail, recording my phone conversations when he visited, and even accessing my personal computer to copy financial documents. "They knew about your work, travel schedule, your social media activity, even your dating history," Catherine explained. "The goal was to paint you as an unstable person who couldn't properly maintain the family property. Derek had been collecting evidence of your alleged negligence for over a year. This included photographs of minor maintenance issues around the house, taken from angles that made normal wear and tear look like serious neglect. Derek had documented a loose porch board as structural damage, photographed normal garden maintenance as property destruction, and even taken pictures of my late-night work sessions as evidence of erratic behavior." Madison had been equally thorough in her research. She'd contacted my grandmother's former doctors, claiming to be concerned about Rose's mental state in her final months. She'd spoken with neighbors, introducing herself as Derek's fiancée, while casually asking questions about my relationship with Rose and my care of the property. The fake attorney, the fraudulent restraining order, the moving truck, that was their endgame, Catherine said. They planned to physically remove you from the property while filing a complex legal challenge that could have tied up the inheritance for years. During that time, they would have been living in the house as caretakers, selling off antiques, and potentially taking out loans against the property value. The financial scope of their intended theft was breathtaking. The house and land were appraised at over $2.3 million. The antique contents were valued at nearly $400,000, and they'd already researched taking out a $500,000 equity loan against the property once they gained legal control. Derek signed preliminary loan documents 3 weeks ago, Catherine revealed, showing me papers with my brother's forged signature claiming ownership of the property. They were planning to disappear with over $1 million while leaving you with the legal battle and the debt. But my grandmother's foresight had saved everything. Rose's hidden recordings didn't just document Derek's resentment. They captured detailed conversations about the entire conspiracy. Madison's voice was clearly recorded discussing timeline strategies, financial projections, and even backup plans if their primary scheme failed. Your grandmother was a remarkably intelligent woman, Catherine said with genuine admiration. She suspected something was wrong months before her death and systematically gathered evidence. She even hired a private investigator to document Madison's previous inheritance scams. The private investigator's report revealed Madison's true history. She'd successfully stolen property from 2 elderly men in Georgia and Florida, using variations of the same marriage and inheritance scheme. In both cases, she disappeared after liquidating family heirlooms and taking out fraudulent loans, leaving her victims financially devastated and legally entangled. The most damning evidence, Catherine said, pulling out a final recording device, is this conversation between Derek and Madison from 2 weeks ago, recorded by the private investigator your grandmother hired. Playing the audio file, I heard my brother's voice discussing me with a coldness that still makes me shiver. He wasn't just planning to steal my inheritance, he genuinely resented my existence, blamed me for our grandmother's favoritism, and had convinced himself that I'd somehow manipulated Rose into loving me more than him. She always got everything, Derek's voice said clearly through the speakers. The attention, the affection, the house. Rose never even considered that I might want to carry on the family legacy. Well, now Savannah's going to learn what it feels like to lose everything. Madison's response was equally chilling. Once we get the property, we can sell it to developers. The land is worth more than the house anyway. Some rich family from Charleston will pay millions to build their dream home on that lot. They weren't just stealing my inheritance. They were planning to destroy 4 generations of family history for a quick profit. As Catherine continued revealing the depth of Derek and Madison's conspiracy, I found myself oscillating between fury and heartbreak. This wasn't just criminal. This was the systematic destruction of everything my grandmother had worked to preserve and protect. The private investigator your grandmother hired documented everything Catherine said, pulling out a thick surveillance file. Madison's previous victims in Georgia and Florida have been contacted by authorities. They're providing testimony about her methods, and the FBI is now involved because this crosses state lines. The surveillance photos were damning. Images of Madison meeting with the fake attorney weeks before the wedding, pictures of Derek photographing my house's interior during family visits, even shots of them researching property law at the county courthouse. They'd been planning this heist with military precision, and every step had been documented. What's particularly disturbing, Catherine continued, is how they manipulated your emotional connection to family. The wedding wasn't just a cover for theft. It was psychological warfare designed to make you more vulnerable to their eventual legal attack. She showed me printed text messages between Derek and Madison, discussing how to exploit my grief over our parents' deaths and my emotional attachment to the house. They'd specifically planned moments during the wedding to create photo opportunities, showing them as the real family who appreciated the property's heritage. Madison spent weeks researching your psychological profile, Catherine explained. She knew about your anxiety around family conflict, your tendency to avoid confrontation, and your guilt about inheriting more than Derek. They planned to use all of that against you during the legal proceedings. The fake documents they'd prepared were sophisticated enough to fool most people. The restraining order looked official, complete with forged judicial signatures and county seals. The inheritance challenge paperwork cited real legal precedents and included fabricated witness statements from family friends who'd supposedly observed my manipulation of Rose. They even prepared false medical records, Catherine said, her voice tight with anger, claiming your grandmother had been diagnosed with dementia and was incompetent when she updated her will. The fake doctor's reports were detailed enough to pass initial scrutiny. But perhaps the most insidious part of their plan was how they'd positioned themselves as the victims. Derek had prepared an emotional narrative about being cut out of his rightful inheritance by a manipulative sister who'd exploited an elderly woman's vulnerability. Madison had crafted a supporting story about trying to protect Derek from family abuse while honoring the true wishes of his beloved grandmother. The moving truck wasn't just theatrical intimidation, Catherine explained. They'd researched squatters' rights laws and planned to establish physical residency in the house during the legal proceedings. Once they were living there, removing them would have required a separate legal process that could have taken months. The financial documents revealed the full scope of their greed. They'd already opened accounts to receive money from selling the stolen antiques, researched auction houses that specialized in estate liquidations, and even contacted real estate developers about potential property sales. Madison had buyers lined up for your grandmother's jewelry collection, Catherine said, showing me correspondence with private collectors. She'd photographed every piece during the wedding planning visits and already negotiated preliminary sales agreements. Derek's betrayal cut even deeper when I saw his detailed inventory of family memories he planned to destroy. He'd cataloged our childhood photo albums, Rose's personal letters, and even our parents' belongings, marking them for disposal as sentimental clutter with no resale value. They saw your family history as inventory to be liquidated, Catherine said gently. Nothing had emotional or historical value beyond its potential profit margin. The surveillance recordings revealed how methodically they'd studied my routines and vulnerabilities. Madison had timed her wedding planning visits to coincide with my work stress, knowing I'd be distracted and grateful for her help. Derek had scheduled his brotherly check-in calls to probe for information about my finances, relationships, and emotional state. They were building a comprehensive profile to use against you in court, Catherine explained. Every conversation was being analyzed for potential ammunition in their inheritance challenge. But the most heartbreaking discovery was finding my grandmother's own words about her growing suspicions. In her final recordings, Rose spoke directly to me with a prescience that now seems prophetic. "Savannah, my dear," her voice said from beyond the grave. "I pray I'm wrong about Derek, but love sometimes blinds us to uncomfortable truths. If you're hearing this, it means my fears were justified. Remember that real family protects and cherishes each other. People who would destroy what I've built for money were never truly family at all." Rose had even updated her insurance policies and legal protections in her final months, ensuring that any attempt to steal or damage the property would result in financial consequences for the perpetrators. She'd secretly installed additional security cameras and changed locks, creating a trail of evidence that would support my ownership claims. "Your grandmother essentially built a legal fortress around your inheritance," Catherine said with admiration. Every document Derek and Madison forged, every lie they told, every theft they committed. She anticipated and prepared evidence to counter their attacks. The private investigator's final report included character references from Rose's doctors, neighbors, and longtime friends, all testifying to her mental sharpness and clear intentions regarding the property inheritance. She'd even recorded video messages explaining her decision-making process and her specific concerns about Derek's sense of entitlement. As Catherine finished presenting the evidence, I realized my grandmother had given me something far more valuable than property and antiques. She'd given me the tools to protect myself from family betrayal and the strength to see justice served against people who would exploit love and trust for personal gain. The weight of Derek and Madison's deception was overwhelming, but so was the power of Rose's protective love reaching across time to shield me from harm. 6 months after that devastating confrontation with the moving truck, I'm sitting in the same kitchen where my world was nearly destroyed, but everything has changed. The legal proceedings moved faster than anyone expected, thanks to my grandmother's meticulous evidence collection and the FBI's involvement in Madison's multi-state fraud ring. Derek and Madison both accepted plea deals rather than face federal trial. Derek received 2 years in prison for conspiracy to commit fraud, theft, and attempted property seizure. Madison, as the ringleader with prior convictions, received 5 years plus restitution requirements to her previous victims. The fake attorney Harold got 18 months for impersonation and fraud conspiracy. But the real justice came in ways I never expected. The stolen antiques were returned, but more importantly, the investigation uncovered additional family heirlooms that Derek had been secretly removing from the house for over a year. Items I'd never even realized were missing. My grandmother's silver tea service, my mother's jewelry collection, even our father's vintage watch collection, were recovered from various pawn shops and private sales. The financial restitution was substantial. Derek had to pay back the appraised value of everything he'd stolen, plus legal fees and property damage costs. Madison's criminal enterprise had accumulated over $800 0-inches assets across her various schemes, much of which was seized and distributed to her victims. My grandmother's estate even received additional compensation from the insurance fraud she'd unwittingly prevented. Perhaps most satisfying was watching their elaborate deception completely crumble under scrutiny. The wedding guests who'd helped catalog my possessions were identified and prosecuted. The storage facility containing stolen antiques led authorities to a broader network of estate theft operations. Madison's sophisticated inheritance scam had been her downfall. It was so well documented that prosecutors called it one of the clearest fraud cases they'd ever seen. The property itself became the final symbol of justice served. Not only did I retain full ownership, but the attempted theft had actually strengthened my legal claim. The courts awarded me additional protections and established legal precedents that will prevent any future inheritance challenges. Rose's Victorian mansion is now permanently protected as a historic family property, exactly as she'd intended. More than the legal victories, I found emotional closure in understanding my grandmother's incredible foresight and love. Reading her private letters and listening to her final recordings, I realized she'd suspected Derek's resentment for years but had hoped family love would overcome his jealousy. When she recognized the threat Madison represented, Rose had acted decisively to protect not just property, but family legacy and my personal safety. The house itself seems different now. Not haunted by betrayal, but strengthened by truth revealed. I've restored every room Derek and Madison violated, but I've also added new security systems and legal protections that honor both Rose's memory and the hard-learned lessons about trust and family loyalty. Derek's imprisonment has been difficult for extended family members, who initially couldn't believe their golden boy was capable of such calculated betrayal. Some relatives tried to convince me to drop charges or show mercy, arguing that family forgives family. But I learned that real family doesn't exploit love for financial gain. And mercy without accountability isn't love. It's enabling. The most unexpected outcome has been connecting with Madison's previous victims. These elderly men who'd lost family properties and lifetime savings to her schemes have become an unlikely support network. We've worked together to prevent future inheritance fraud and help other families recognize warning signs of similar scams. Today marks exactly 1 year since Derek and Madison's arrest, and I'm hosting a very different kind of family gathering in Rose's house. My real family, the cousins, aunts, and longtime friends who supported me through the legal battle, are here celebrating not just justice served but family bonds that proved stronger than betrayal and greed. Standing in the same dining room where Derek tried to steal my inheritance, surrounded by people who actually love and support me, I can feel my grandmother's presence in every restored antique every protected heirloom, every family story that will continue being told in this house for generations to come. The lesson Derek and Madison learned too late is that karma doesn't just come back, it comes back with compound interest and federal investigators. But the lesson I learned is even more valuable. Real family protects, preserves, and cherishes what matters. Everything else is just performance. So here's my question for all of you watching this incredible journey. Have you ever experienced family betrayal that made you question everything you thought you knew about blood loyalty? How did you handle discovering that someone you trusted was working against you? And what family stories or lessons have helped you navigate difficult relationships? Your experiences might help someone else recognize warning signs or find strength during their own family crisis. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and often respond personally. If this story resonated with you, or reminded you of similar situations, please hit that like button to help others find these important discussions about family dynamics and personal protection. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell because I share more real-life stories about justice, family drama, and life lessons every week. Sometimes the most powerful stories come from ordinary people facing extraordinary betrayals, and your support helps these experiences reach people who need to hear them. Thank you for taking this journey with me through one of the most challenging but ultimately empowering experiences of my life. I hope Rose's wisdom about protecting what matters and my hard-learned lessons about family loyalty serve you well in your own relationships and life decisions. Remember, real family builds you up, protects your best interests, and celebrates your successes. Anyone who tries to tear you down for their own gain isn't family, they're just people who happen to share your DNA. Choose your inner circle wisely, trust your instincts when something feels wrong, and never be afraid to seek justice when people try to exploit your love and generosity. Until next week, keep protecting what matters most to you, and keep believing that justice and truth will always win in the end.